I will not live like this. I will not have this life. I will not do this. I always saw money as being something that we can influence and control. And it is.
How do you make sure that you're not getting distracted as much as possible?
The most valuable asset that we have is time. How we use our time is what determines everything in our lives.
How do you start to get them to understand that? How do we really think through what those costs will be to us?
There's just been such a misrepresentation of entrepreneurship. The truth is 85% of businesses fail.
What do you recommend people who faith is a big part of their life but are unsure of how to integrate it into their business?
A lot of the challenges that we've seen as a result of faith removed from the centerpiece of society.
Where do you stand on this? Do we push further into the things that we're great at, or is it better to lift up some of the things that we're not as good at and kind of pull them up into a more workable level?
That is such an interesting question. We were given our strengths to exploit them. We were given our gifts from God to use them. That is the primary calling of our lives. I am very much leaning into our strengths is the core of how we achieve success. However,
hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. We have a tremendous episode for you today, a conversation with Kelly Roach, rising up out of a household that was filled with drama and fear, barely living above the poverty line. She today has 6 different businesses, highly successful, all 7 figures to 8-figure businesses, and she runs it all through the filter of her family and her faith. And in this episode, what we dive into is how to bring faith into your business, how to think about it, why it's important, and tactically, if you are not subscribed to this show, it would mean the world to me. It would be a massive sign of support if you could subscribe, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the audio version of the podcast, Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to podcasts. Like the video, subscribe to the video, and if you have, leave comments either in the reviews or in the comments. I read every comment. I tag the guest if there's a guest and bring them in so that we can have conversations around these topics and really drive them forward. My friends, I love you for being here. Let's get on to Kelly Roach. Kelly, thank you for taking the time. Glad to have you here.
excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So in spending some time researching your story, one of the things that you highlight kind of in your, who you are is, you say you grew up, just above the poverty line. And my story is kind of very similar to that. We never were hungry, but luxury wasn't an option.
Yeah.
Even what we considered luxuries, most people today wouldn't even blink at.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in, one, how you felt you did that, and 2, what do you think the characteristics are of the people who pull themselves out of those situations and thrive in their lives, and those who continue to go to the same bar, kind of live the same exact way their parents did and never break free of that place of kind of just getting by?
Yeah, it's so fascinating, right? So, for me, actually, my story is kind of interesting because my dad actually worked for a nonprofit, a religious nonprofit. And in deciding to do so, basically, we were living off of the wage that could barely support one person. And there were 5 kids in my family. So it was insane. I don't even know how they pulled this off to put food on the table, but they did after a lot of stress, anxiety, crying, depression, constant stress in our household. But I'm a person of faith. One thing my parents did really, really well is they instilled that in me from a young age. And, I always kind of looked at life from this perspective, right? There's things in life that you can do something about, and there's things in life that you can't. So, for example, if you have a devastating loss in your life, someone that you care about passes away, or you suddenly get a terminal illness, these are things that you cannot control in your life. You can't decide whether or not they're going to happen. You can't do anything to change the fact that this event has happened. And now what you can do is decide how you're going to respond to it. But to me, since a very young age, since I was literally on the free lunch program, and I was mortified one day when there was a volunteer lunch lady that ripped open my envelope and didn't know that I was on the free program and that there was nothing in it. And it was in front of all the kids. And that was my final straw of I will not live like this. I will not have this life. I will not do this, because I always saw money as being something that we can influence and control. And it is. Anyone on YouTube for free can learn how to make money. Anyone who has cell service and a cell phone can make millions of dollars from their home. And anyone who has the desire to change their financial situation can. And we can come up with all the stories and excuses and reasons why our situation's harder and our situation's more complex. And, there's a reason why we can't. But the truth is in the environment that we live in today, that really truly is accessible and possible for pretty much everyone that has internet service. And from a very young age, having that experience, I just made the decision that I just simply wasn't going to live like that. I wasn't going to be put in a situation to be compromised, embarrassed, feeling very exposed and vulnerable in that way in an area of life that I felt could be learned. And so it was really a decision for me at a really young age that I believe, unlike my father, that I can make money and do good in the world. I don't need to compromise and say the only way I can do good in the world is if I don't have enough money to take care of my family. And so I think I've been on this journey since a really young age to figure out, how can I use my gifts? How can I make lots of money? And how do I do tremendous good in the world by focusing on the things that I, in fact, can influence and control in my life? And, I think that's probably a lesson that's pretty relevant to most people listening in some area of life when you listen to this show today.
How old were you when you kind of first had this thought that you didn't want to live this way?
It's funny because I was talking about this story, I think with my daughter maybe the other day, and she asked me what grade I was in. And I said, I can't remember. That's so bad. I want to say it was probably I'm going to say it was around sixth grade. I was old enough that I was like, no, no, and since I was a really young person, as a very young person, I was first a mother's helper, and then I was a gatekeeper at the pool. And then I started waitressing as soon as I was legally able. And I had 5 jobs all throughout college. So I just made it my business to say, I'm going to learn as much as I possibly can. I'm going to acquire as many useful skills as I possibly can. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to make my life my masterpiece and to not live based on standards that were set for me, but standards that were set by me. And that's worked out pretty well so far. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's actually, so that's like sixth grade's like around 12 years old. That's right around the same time that I had the same exact thought. I remember, I can remember walking down the streets of, my small town to my buddy's house and just saying to myself, I don't want this future. You know what I mean? Like if I choose to live here because it's my choice, that's one thing.
Yes.
But I'm not going to be forced to live here because I haven't done anything that gives me the ability to break out.
Exactly.
And it's very funny. That feels like a moving year. One of the things that you kind of highlighted in there was control. What I wrote down, paraphrasing what you said, was kind of control what you can control. Right?
Yeah.
So that to me feels like a core kind of first principle that you hear said in different ways from a lot of people who are highly successful. They tend to, as much as they can, either outsource or just let pass by them the things that are out of their control. They don't waste brain cycles on it. How do you cultivate that in your work? Because it's a very hard thing for many people to stay focused, to not allow negativity to creep in, to not get lost in the presidential election or this war or climate or whatever your topic du jour of fear is. How do you capture that idea? How do you make sure that you're not getting distracted as much as possible?
Yeah. I mean, I think the most valuable asset and resource that we have is time. And how we use our time is what determines everything in our lives. And so for me, I've made it my business since I made that decision at a young age that I wanted a different life to really place a high value on how I use my time. And when you do that, you have the discipline to use your time in a productive manner that's going to move you forward towards your goals. And it sounds so simple, but as you know, that is like the biggest struggle that people have, right? And so I think being ruthless with your time is the number one core principle of achieving really high levels of success, because it's not about doing 100 things. It's about understanding the 5 or 10 things that are going to change everything. And I say this all the time, you can change your life in an hour a day. You can absolutely change any area of your life in an hour a day. You want to learn investing? You spend an hour a day learning investing, you'll be one of the top investors in the world. You want to, build a body. You want to be able to be like one of the top people in physique in your age and in your space. You spend an hour a day working on your body. Nutrition, wealth, health, relation. You want to have one of the best marriages in the world. Spend an hour a day investing in your relationship. If you think about that and you let that play out, and actually, let me take it a step further. There's actually been studies done on this. Jesse Itzler talks about this all the time, that if you spend 18 minutes a day on something, by the end of that year, you'll be in like the top 5% of people in the world in that thing. Now think about that. That's insane. That's insane to think that if you were to just dedicate 18 minutes a day to the right things, you can basically have anything that you want in your life. And, most people, to your point, they just don't have the disciplined focus to keep their energy on that. And I think, people like us that came from being very clear on what we don't want, you then have to marry that with being very clear on what you do want. And so when you know what you don't want, you know what you do want, then you have to decide, well, what are the 3 to 5 things that I can do every single day that are going to move me forward towards that thing that I do want? And for me, I decided that was learning sales, marketing, communication, and leadership. So I have focused my life on learning those things. And that is what allowed me to take my first business over 8 figures, Inc. 5000 list, like really just like taking the industry by storm. I started 5 other companies. Now I have a portfolio of 6 companies. Focusing on those things. I don't chase the fads. I don't chase the trends. I don't waste my time with the newest technology. I never have. I'm not constantly chasing 100 different rabbits. I'm like, what are the 3 to 5 things that are going to move me and the team and the organization forward? And it's all about the discipline to use your time on the things that are going to move you forward towards your goal. And to your point, why don't people do it? Well, a lot of times it's not the thing that we're naturally the best at or most comfortable with, obviously, right? So if you want something different in your life, then that probably means that it's going to require you to do things that don't come naturally, or learn new things that make you uncomfortable, or put you in a position where you have to fail a whole lot of times before you figure out how you're going to have success. And I think, that's why lots of people have big dreams, but don't do anything about them, because it requires a behavior change. And behavior change requires being disciplined, being uncomfortable, and failing a lot in the process, right?
Do you think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that we set these goals, but they're other people's goals? I have this theory.
Yes.
I'm actually 6 days from us talking here in February. I'm doing my first TEDx talk.
Congratulations. That's so wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very excited about it. I've been working on it for like a year, and
that's
obviously
wonderful.
we're at the moment where now it's real. Its title is Stop Living a Life You Didn't Choose. And I have this theory that I want to put in front of you and get your feedback on. It's the idea is we get much of our lack of satisfaction, purpose, success is the result of prioritizing our status in a hierarchy versus mastering the craft that we need to be good at. And what I found throughout my career, also started and sold businesses and been an executive and done a lot of mentorship and coaching and stuff over the years on the side. And people, and this is where I'm interested in your take. People come to me with these goals, right? Like, what are we doing? Like, we're talking here. You reached out to me, how can I help? Like, what do you want? And they'll start to talk about the things that they want. And it sounds like it came out of like a $37 guru, PDF template. And it's like, is that what man, like,
yeah.
And I've tried to reframe how I asked the next question. How I originally started asking it was like, is that what you really want? People would say, yes. Well, it's like, how did you get to that goal? Like, if people be like, I want to own an 8-figure business. Why? Yeah. Right? Like, do you want it because you want to say that you did that? Do you want that because entrepreneurship is cool? Do you want that because your parents were successful and you feel like you have to be financially? Like, And I think so much of the inaction that happens is because we set goals that sound right, but don't feel right. So then we're unwilling to make the sacrifices, right?
Yes.
And this kind of leads into the last part of my little paraphrase here before I kick it back over to you, which is where I took a lot of them was, okay, if we don't actually know what your true goal is yet, then maybe you don't know the actions to take. So like a great place to start is like what you're not going to do. Like, I love that you highlighted that because I think it's so incredibly important. And so few people write down, like, I will not take a random cup of coffee meeting or pick your brain meeting on a Friday morning because that's prime time creation or work time. Right. And if you stick that in there because you feel like you should, like, so starting to make a list of the things you're just unwilling to do first. And like out of that tends to come what you should be doing, I guess. Does that make sense? Does that play for you?
Yeah, I speak to this all the time. So I think, there's two big things. And I think part one is everything that you just described. It's that people are setting goals based on societal norms and expectations of their peers, their industry, their network, their associations that are being projected onto them versus them deciding what they want. And I'll talk more to that in just a second and a deep belief that I have around that. But the second part of it is, I think people don't ask themselves what the implications of what their dreams will cost are going to be. And that's a very, very important question to ask because dreams come with a price tag. And the bigger the dream, the bigger the price tag. And if you're not willingly, contractually obligating your heart to investing the price that your dream costs, then you're just going to live a life of frustration because you're never going to act in alignment with the dreams that you desire, which means you're never going to accomplish them. You're always going to feel like a failure, always going to feel like you're falling short. And that's because A, they weren't your dreams to begin with. So you were never going to do them because they weren't in alignment for you. They weren't even your dreams to begin with. And B, you never stop to ask yourself, what is the sacrifice that will be required in order to do this? And anything that's worth anything in your life is going to come with immense sacrifice. And that's what makes it worthwhile. And that's how you learn the skills to achieve and sustain success is by going through that molding and maturing process of becoming the person that can not just accomplish that thing, but hold it. Right. And I think there's also a faith perspective on that. And this is just my personal, purview. But, as a business strategist for many years, I think that each of us were put here with a very specific calling from God. I think we each have a mission. I think every day that we wake up, that's God saying to us, I need you to be here for one more day because there's something that you haven't contributed to this world yet that you're here to do. And I think people are many times operating of the world, which is ego, instead of operating of God, which is asking, what am I here to contribute? How am I here to serve? Where am I being called to go in my life as a next step? And, I think that when you pivot into getting on this journey and on this path of fulfilling your calling, which is from your soul, it's from your heart, it's from your intuition, versus pursuing checking boxes and getting all of these external things, you can still achieve the external things that are maybe for you that are in alignment with that, but you probably will act more congruently with accomplishing the goals that you set out to achieve because to everything that you just said, and I love what your talk is about, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's a huge thing that alignment is there. Right.
Yeah, I'm completely aligned with you on the faith aspect. We're Christians. My kids actually go to Catholic school. I have a mixed relationship with Catholicism, but definitely a Christian. And it's funny. The other day, my son asked me about hell. Right, he's 11. My younger son is 9, and we're in the car, and he asked me, he's like, Dad, is hell really like in the ground? Right, and I know he's old enough to know that is, I think he felt like that might be a silly question, but obviously he asked it. And I said, again, I go, dude, I don't know. I am not a biblical scholar, like I've been a Christian my entire life, but obviously take this in with a grain of salt. I said, my understanding or how I visualize hell or our relationship to that concept is that, as you said, when God puts your soul into a body, he gives you a perfect version of your life, right? He gives you this, you do, which is impossible because we're fallible, right? But he gives you this perfect version that you could be, right? Whatever that is, whatever that value is that you're contributing to the world. And our goal is to wake up every day and work as hard as we can to get as close to that version of what God intended us to be as possible.
Yeah.
And I said, heaven or hell is the emotional connection we have to the distance between what we end up being and what we could have been. Yeah. And I said, so when you get weighed and measured, by, again, just talking through the visualization, St. Peter, and you have to see what you could have been, do you look at it and go, I did all right. I got pretty close. You know what I mean? Considering that I'm imperfect and we're all going to make mistakes and, hey, I did a great job. Like, awesome. Yeah. Or you look at it and you go, oh my God, if I had just put Netflix away and I didn't get high every night and I worked out once in a while and I focused a little more on my community, my family, I could have been that, right? That's hell. That feeling of what you could have been, right? And I think, take that visualization and the faith aspect as much as you can. I think what you're saying is so many people have started. I believe our culture today has taken an atheist spin to this self-orientation when every book, take Christianity out of it, every book that has lasted thousands of years, the core concept is give more than you want back in return. Yeah. So if you just focus on value creation, it's the unlock to all your wildest dreams, right? Yeah. Now, it may not be what you think your dreams should be today, but it doesn't mean that it's not available to you. And I think this idea that you've carved out that I'd love for you to dig in a little more, or maybe how we think through this as a thought experiment, is this idea of what your dreams cost. Yeah. Nobody talks about this. No one who hasn't done a depth of work that you've done or I've done is kind of holds us in their head. But like, if you want to be that thing, it comes with a cost. Like the thing I love doing in business more than anything else is speaking on stage. I've done 350 plus keynotes in my career. I absolutely love it. It is where I feel like I'm the purest version of myself in a work environment. Yet I have a 9 and 11-year-old. I'm unwilling to pay the cost today of being away from them more than, say, once a month. So I will never have more than 12 gigs in a year now. Right. But because I'm unwilling to pay that cost. But you see people who want to become speakers and they're out on the circuit and they start running around and they take every gig they can get. And they're, I just need stage time, and you're away from home 45 days, 50 days a year at a minimum. And all of a sudden your relationship starts to get cracks in it. Your kids start to act a little funny around you, or they get very needy because they're not seeing. And it's like, and all of a sudden they're going, wait a minute, this isn't what I want. It's like, you never thought about the cost of that thing. So going through that thought experiment, when you're working with a mentee or a coaching client or whatever, like, how do you start to get them to understand that? And how do we really think through what those costs will be to us?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the most important responsibilities that people like you and I have. And I very often talk about business through the context of training for your business, like an athlete trains for their sport. I say it's a blood sport. And I talk a lot about the realities of what it means to be a CEO of a successful organization, which there's no clear and honest representation of that online whatsoever. And so it starts by people like us just sharing these truths with people so that they can get into a state of preparation. Because a big part of what's happened, particularly in the online world, is that there's just been such a misrepresentation and over glamorize, glorification of entrepreneurship. And, the truth is 85% of businesses fail. The divorce rates amongst entrepreneurs are higher. There's a mental health crisis. There's a significant amount of depression. And I believe the people that don't go through those things are the people that did the exercise of being highly discerning. And to your point, actually, it's very interesting. I have a daughter that's 10. She's about to turn 11. My favorite thing to do also is speaking. I have specifically not pursued a speaking career for the last 10 years because I am not willing to travel and be away from my family for all the reasons that you just said, because it was not worth it to me. What I would gain, which is a lot, same with you, you would gain a lot by being on the road doing that, is not equivalent to what I would lose in that time that I can't ever get back. That's unreplaceable. I just literally started taking a speaking program this month that starts next week because I just started homeschooling my daughter. Best decision ever. And me and my husband are actually doing it together, but now we can travel together. We have more freedom. I don't have to be away from them, all of those things. So it's both to the positive and to the negative. When I was starting my business, I was working as an executive in a Fortune 500 company. My husband and I decided that instead of having two incomes, we wanted one of us to be home full time with our daughter our entire lives, never put her in daycare, never with a babysitter with us, and retired my husband while I was starting my new business, worked a full-time job and worked in the business for years. And I was willing to pay that price because the life that we live today is so extraordinary. It's everything I dreamed of. It's everything I worked for. And our relationship with our daughter and our relationship with one another is because of those sacrifices that I made for many years leading up to her being where she is now. And when you meet her, every person that meets her is like, what? Like, this girl's 10, right? Because she's been poured into and she's been enriched and she's been developed and she has been just grown and cultivated so intentionally. And so to your point, when we think about our goals and dreams, we have to both think of the things that are absolutes to us, that are part of what we believe is our purpose, our calling, our true reason for being here. And we have to start calculating the price of what it will cost. And when it's something that is negotiable, that would be nice, that maybe it would fill our ego, maybe it would fast track our success, maybe it would be a great feather in our cap. The example for you and I was speaking. We both did the calculation and said, it ain't happening. Like, I was not willing to give up that time with my husband. I wasn't willing to give up that time with my daughter. And only now that we can do that together and make it a family experience is that, worth it. So I think it's both knowing what you don't want. And for me, coming from a household where my parents were fighting every single day, anxiety, depression, never knowing how they were going to pay the bills, the last thing I want to do is go create wealth for myself, but lose my relationship over it. Like, those two things are not incongruent. So I think it's also a big part of this is that many people have been taught to look at success in a singular fashion versus in a holistic fashion. Because when we look at success, when you compromise your relationship, your health, other areas of your life in order to get further ahead, what will happen is you will ultimately pay that price. You're just going to be paid the price later, right? And so you have to make calculated sacrifices that aren't going to actually be the thing that blows up the thing that you're trying to create. And so this is where taking time to actually really think about what matters to you on a deep level, not on a I want to achieve level, like on a what do I want my day-to-day life to look like? What do I want my experience of living to be like? When I accomplish that thing, who do I want to be with? How do I want to feel? What are we going to do together? If you consider all of those implications, it will give you a pretty clear roadmap on what is worth sacrificing and what isn't worth sacrificing. And a lot of times what I see is people are more willing to sacrifice their time, their health, their relationship, all of these other areas of life. They're willing to sacrifice those things in an instant, but they're not willing to sacrifice just getting themselves uncomfortable to just do the damn thing that they need to do that's going to get them what they want. And so there's this massive incongruence between what people say that they want and what they're doing about it. And then they use all these other things as an excuse. So a lot of it is just this radical honesty with ourselves. It's this radical honesty with ourselves. And I think going back to what you shared about your TED Talk, it all starts with the congruence and the alignment of being on this very personal journey, because the only way that you can come to the right conclusions is if you're looking at it through the right lens. And if you're not looking at it through the right lens, even if you go through the exercise, you won't arrive at the right conclusion, right?
Yeah. I think a major, well, there's so many things in here. One, I completely agree with everything you said. The radical honesty piece is I think a challenge for all of us, but is so incredibly important to try to cultivate in our lives. And I take it even one step further and say, we have to be radically honest with ourselves first.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us, when we read these books or we take in these topics or we hear a TEDx talk on something like radical honesty or whatever, there's a couple different ways to package that. We immediately go to how I communicate with my spouse or how I communicate with my team or how,
yeah.
and it's like,
no.
like those things, I don't know that being 100% honest in any one of those situations is actually the right thing to do. However, if we're not being honest with ourselves first, we can't be honest with them, because now we're playing a role or responding in a way that we feel like this version of me, should be. And it's like, no, who are you? What are not just the good things, but what are the bad things about you? It's funny. I divorced, unfortunately, 3 years ago. And, I've had like a couple relationships with other women since my wife. And, it's funny, like you get so used to being with someone, there's kind of things that go kind of unsaid if you're not being intentional about it. And, I get feedback from like, you're disorganized with your schedule. Right. And part of that is like, I have 2 kids that are in like a million sports and I don't always know. And it's like that, I just have to be honest with myself that like, for me to be highly organized is real work. It's like work. Like for other people, it's just like, oh, here goes there, this goes there. That's what it is. Like, that's great. It's the opposite for me. Like that is the opposite for me. So it's then doing a calculation of letting people know up front, hey, just so you know, his schedule's crazy. Sometimes I don't get everything right. I may miss a date or whatever. Also, like how much work, and this is really where this question comes in. Like when we start to get radically honest with ourselves and understanding, okay, I maybe I'm being honest with where I want to be, right? And I'm honest with the costs. How do we start to frame the places that we should actually put in work to get better? And like, do we double into our strengths or triple into our strengths, like a Gary Vaynerchuk would say? Or do I take a organizational class and try to level up my calendar organization or whatever to become better at that thing? Like, where do you stand on this? Like, do we push further into the things that we're great at and really just outsource or accept the things that we're not? Or is it better to lift up some of the things that we're not as good at and kind of pull them up into a more workable level?
Yeah, that is such an interesting question. And I love that you asked that. And I don't know that I'm not the almighty with the perfect answer, but I can certainly give a little bit of my opinion on that. I think first of all, we were given our strengths to exploit them. We were given our gifts from God to use them. That is the primary calling of our lives. So to me, I do feel that our strengths were made our strengths because that is where we are meant to assert our power and invest our energy. So I am very much of the idea that leaning into our strengths is the core of how we achieve success. However, we all have, and I hate saying the word vice because vice many times is used in the context of like drugs, alcohol, like negative habits, but that's not the same as you could be here using your strengths, but because you don't have organization, you're constantly missing this thing that would take you from here to here, right? So that's the 20% that we all have to look at to say, okay, 80% of my energy is going to go into maximizing my gifts and deploying my strengths, but I have to pay attention to the 20% that could give me another 80% that I'm ignoring because it's not my natural strength. And that's where I feel like we miss the mark, right? People either go crazy leaning into their weaknesses and they just feel like a failure all the time because they're actually not operating in their zone of genius. And that's why they're miserable. And that's why they feel unsuccessful, because they're actually miserable because they're unsuccessful because they're just not even focused on the right things. I think that's different from understanding where, and I think for a lot of us, like for you, for example, like you're a business leader, you have a busy family, you're running all over the place with the kids, all these things. Like you probably just need someone that you can outsource, like helping you manage your schedule with. And like, instead of you trying to become like great at managing your schedule, you just need to get help in that area. And I find that a lot of times for myself and for high powered entrepreneurs that I'm working with in coaching, many times it's an area that we either need the right help or better help in. It's not that we need to become something that we're not. It's that we need to identify, this is a weakness of mine. There's people that are great at this. I need the right person that's going to complement me in this area to make sure I have success. But what I will say, because I see a lot of leaders do this with sales. Oh, I'm not a salesperson. So then they go hire a salesperson. And then they go fire a salesperson and they fire another salesperson. They fire another salesperson because they're not training them. They're not managing them. They're not coaching them. They're not giving them the right support systems. So yes, a lot of times I feel like we need to complement our weaknesses with someone else's strength. But at the same time, there's a role that sits in the middle of that, which is giving that person the right support to be able to support us, which is where I feel like people like us fall short sometimes, if that makes sense.
No, I think it completely does. In the last company that I started, I sold it in 2023. But one of the things that, like, I had been an executive for about a decade before that at different companies, but it wasn't until it was my company that this like really hammered home. I kind of always knew it to be true, and I think it's a little more my natural style, but it certainly wasn't until I got into this company. So it was primarily, it was in the insurance industry. It was commercial insurance sales. It was a digital agency. And, I was, for the first year, the number one salesperson, right? And that's kind of my bread and butter, is business development, sales, and marketing, and everything was good. And then eventually I hit a point where now I had 3 additional people. So there's 4 of us, and exactly what you just described was happening, right?
Yeah.
Things were falling through the cracks. They weren't doing it the way it needed to be done. And what I realized in that moment was, and I think this is like the complete misunderstanding of what a leadership position is. Like, when you become a leader, you don't sit on the ivory mountain and reach down to people. If anything, you become the Sherpa at the bottom of the mountain, literally walking people up the mountain. Like, so we came up with this term of service, right?
Yeah.
Like, as you ascend in this company, you become more of service to the people below you.
Yeah.
And that idea, it changed the whole construct of the business, and really is what propelled it. Was all this, I immediately stopped selling, but stopped selling to then be like, okay, account management team, what are the things that you need? Is it a piece of technology? Is it training?
Yeah.
Do I need to go get a consultant? Like, is it a new piece of, is it a UX analysis? Like, what do we need? Sales, same thing. And all of a sudden I became like, almost in the tasks that I was doing and a lot of the things that I was doing, almost, if this were visual, like underneath them in the things that I was doing. And, but most leaders do not see this. And there's just, that classic, just, I give you a paycheck, just do what I tell you to do mentality. Yeah. And that just simply does not work over the long term. And it's how you have these high churn rates. And it's just such a miss. And I think it comes from, and I want to come back to, here's where I'm going with this long diatribe. I am very interested, and I'd like to spend most of our time remaining on this topic. I am very interested in the integration of faith into business, right? And I think that this idea of being of service certainly comes out of a lot of my Christian beliefs, and that's why it was in my brain, and et cetera. But I feel like faith in business, it's like some people go all in and it's got everything. And it's like they wear, they're wearing cutoff sleeves with their cross tattoo and, all this stuff, and the chains hanging out. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But like, or we kind of like, a lot of people hide it. And I'm very interested, being that faith is so important to you, how you've chosen and what you would recommend to integrate faith, your beliefs. Some organizations, simply saying the word God will get you, well, maybe not anymore because Trump's president, but like up until a month ago, it would get you canceled. You know what I mean? It get you fired for saying that. So how do you do it? And what do you recommend people who faith is a big part of their life, but are unsure of how to integrate it into their business?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I'll just say, faith is the centerpiece of any healthy and productive society and culture. And a lot of the challenges that we've seen, especially in the US for our US listeners over the last decade, have come as a result of faith really being removed from the centerpiece of society. And so if you're a person of faith, I think you're really being called in this moment to share that and to have that be a part of how you do business and how you interact with people. And my personal perspective is, I didn't share my faith. I kept it very private for my first 10 years of being in business. And, after COVID, when I saw the level of just despair and desperation and just the depths of struggle that people were in, I really started publicly sharing my faith and my faith perspective. And, I really started calling on leaders to start sharing their faith and living their faith and using faith as a mechanism for expanding their capacity, their courage, their strength as leaders, all of those things. And, I definitely wish that I had started that much sooner. I will say I think it was a lack of courage on my part that I didn't share it sooner, because I was always like, oh, like I got it. I have to keep it professional. I have to keep it separate. I don't want to be like preaching at people, and I don't want to like make people uncomfortable and this, that, and the other. And, definitely my experience of beginning to introduce my faith was, first of all, it was hugely welcomed, and people are craving that so significantly right now. They're craving something rich and real and substantive and something deeper. And so I would say for anyone that's thinking like, oh, that it won't be embraced or that it won't be welcomed, I think you'll be shocked. I know I was. So that's point one. I think point two is that the way that you share your faith, I think, is important, because I know for me, my mission is really kind of a perspective on trying to reintegrate faith back into the centerpiece of society. So I think a lot of people's experience of faith has been very radical, where it's like someone that is just fanatical, or a church that they experience, or a person that they experience that was just too far, too aggressive. And so a lot of people have moved away from the church. They've moved away from religion. They've moved away from faith in whatever perspective because of that. And so I think that's a real opportunity to be the change that you want to see in the world. And that's how I view that is, you can share your faith in your content. You can share your faith when I run an event with my team. I gather my team to pray before the event. We have team meetings in the morning on Zoom. Starting this year, I started opening the Zoom room 15 minutes early for anyone who wants to come and pray. I was shocked at the number of team members, and slowly the number just kept growing and growing and growing and growing. And, so I think there's lots of little ways that you can just begin to show that you're a person of faith and be welcoming to others, to also reclaim that part of themselves, whatever that looks like. And, I say to my team all the time, I always think about the song, "They'll know we are Christians by our love," right? So I think a lot of people are fearful to share their faith because they don't want to feel like they're preaching at people or telling them what to do. And what I believe, especially in the secular world and in the business world, is the way that you conduct yourself as a business person can reflect your Christian values without you needing to be like screaming Bible verses at people. I actually do teach using Bible verses in some of my programs. So I love doing that. And there's spaces and places where I do that. And there's places and spaces that I don't do that. But there's a lot of ways that you can reflect your value system and reflect being a person of faith without it being direct or aggressive. That from my perspective, what my goal is I want to get people to buy their first Bible, or walk back into a church, or start praying again, or start even asking themselves, what are my faith beliefs? Like, what do I believe? Start questioning things. And I've been successful doing that. And I've been successful just opening that part of people's hearts again, which is what my goal is. And then from there, everyone walks a unique faith path. Everyone walks a unique relationship that's between them and their creator. And it's none of our business what that looks like. But I think just being a person that by demonstrating your faith in the way that you operate, the way that you conduct yourself, the way that you communicate, lead, and do business, that's a great starting point for all of us. And then you see where it goes from there,
Yeah, I completely agree. Whenever anyone asks me about, because I'd say similar journey around COVID, that early COVID was when I was building my company. And actually, I launched my business 7 days before Cuomo shut down New York. So I launched on March 9th, 2020. And on March 16th of 2020, the state got shut down. And at that time, for good reason, that's not a knock on Cuomo. He did a lot of things that are worthy of being criticized, but not that particular decision. And when people ask me about, when I started mentioning my faith and talking about my beliefs in that regard on this show, I had some people reach out and like, oh, that's courageous, or are you worried about, XYZ? And I just said, if someone doesn't want to do business with me because I'm a practicing Christian, that's a good thing. And I don't mean it like the fact that they didn't do business. It means they wouldn't have long-term been a good value fit for what I was trying to do. Right.
For sure.
And that's fine. Like
for sure.
There is no requirement for you to believe what I believe to do business with me. However, I want you to know who I am so that you can self-select in. And that's one of the things that I don't know if my brain is broken or just what, but like I've always, for the most part, been very willing to share exactly how I feel about things. It creates negativity. It creates people who in the space don't agree with you or will use something you said to attack you, which all those things are okay, because the other side of it is the people who end up doing business with you feel so much more connected to you and understood. And like the example I give is if all things are equal and you have two people to choose to do business with, and one, is a practicing Christian in this case, and one is a practicing atheist. Everything else, they look exactly the same. They talk exactly the same. Everything else about them is exactly the same, except for those two things. I'm going to guarantee the vast majority of people will go with the Christian because that they abide, they have at least some level of humility to defer to a higher power, which says to me is they think give value versus take value. And this like postmodern, liberal, atheist, self-oriented, secular mentality that has creeped into our country, like these people are not happy. Now, granted, you could be out there an atheist and saying to yourself like, oh, I'm happy, you're wrong. The statistics would say that you're more the edge case than you are the rule, because you are living every day to your next whim because you are the center of the universe. And it is simply, one, you are not, just statistically. And two, there's a hole there that you're trying to fill with these ideas that seemingly have no backing or for success. You know what I mean? That's I think what we've shown, not to get political, but in the most recent election is that an idea can make us feel good inside, but at the end of the day, it actually has to produce results. And what we're learning is that the kind of postmodern liberal belief structure, this atheistic belief structure, it simply doesn't produce positive results. It can make you feel good and it can allow you to signal all day long, right? And in your groups, you can form little hierarchies around who signals the best and look how, this I am, except none of those scenarios, none of those mindsets, thought processes have produced real consistent results to the positive. It just hasn't happened.
No.
And that's the part that I struggle with when I come up against some of these individuals is like, just show me one receipt where that mentality actually produced positive results for people long term. And you can't find it yet we still fight this battle every day. And I think so much of it has to do with faith. So
well, and I mean, I'll just add one thing to that before we move on. And I think and this is a huge, thing for me with homeschooling my daughter too. I do the Christian studies with her. And, so I have the ability to really do that faith formation with her, which I think your whole life is predicated by what your belief system is, right? Like your whole life is predicated by that. But to your point, I think that if you have had some kind of exposure to a faith life, you have an advantage in life. And I think there's a lot of people, unfortunately, in our world today that have not even gotten that exposure. And that is why I feel that people like us have a responsibility. That's why every podcast that I go on now, you said before we got on the show, you're like, well, what do you want to talk about? I'm like, I can talk about anything, but this is what I really want to talk about. Let's talk about faith and family, because people see the level of success that I've had and they're like, oh, it must be this. And I'm like, no, actually it's this. Let's focus over here, because you can give anyone the blueprint to make millions of dollars. But most people that make millions of dollars ends up losing it all because it wasn't anchored in truth. And that goes back to the topic of your TED Talk about alignment, about your goals being your goals and your dreams. And it goes back to my point of putting what goes first, right? Faith and family first, and then the pursuit of using our gifts at the highest level. So if there's anyone listening to the show today that has a faith life, that has that relationship with God, Christ, Savior, Jesus, and you haven't been sharing it, maybe you ended up listening to the show today as a reason to maybe just start slowly integrating that into the conversation, because you could save someone's life, you could save their marriage, you could redirect someone's entire life journey just because you shared your faith life. You can save so many businesses that closed last year closed because people lost faith. They just didn't, it wasn't that they didn't know how to make a dollar, because they knew how to make a dollar. They were making a dollar. It's because they lost hope, and you lose hope when you don't have faith. When you have faith, you can keep going because you're not walking by sight. Right. And so there's a whole, it influences and impacts every single decision that we make, because it's a belief structure that then drives every behavior that we have. Right.
Yeah. It ends up being the foundation that you can rely on in the storm.
For
That's
sure.
what it is.
For
you know,
sure.
you even spend 5 minutes a day or 5 minutes a week, even 5 minutes a week in just silent contemplation.
Yeah.
You don't need to know prayers. I mean, this is what I tell people who come to me. Again, not a biblical scholar, right? I have had for a very long time my own unique way of practicing my faith, as much as I do read about it a lot. But I just tell people, like, just you don't need to know a prayer. Like, I don't know what prayer to say. I'm like, God does
Do
not only hear in
something.
prayers, right? Like, just have a conversation and share and whatever. And the best part is you can be max vulnerable, because one, it's happening in your head, and two, he already knows. So like you can be max vulnerable in that small moment of connection, even if it's very loose and you just feel the tiniest little thing. When you stand up, you're like, okay, I'm going to be all right. I'm gonna, and like just that little tiny step. I couldn't agree with you more. And frankly, you're pushing me to even be maybe more candid and more forward and more direct in the way we talk about these things, because I honestly don't care in which way you choose to celebrate your relationship with the Creator, right? Christianity is the way that I have chosen, but there, if you look at the core value structure of all of the 2,000-year-old religions, right? You find these core concepts that are exactly the same. So what that tells me is, right, God realized some people needed to experience their relationship with him through Jesus and Christianity. Some people needed to experience it through an Eastern religion or an Asian subcontinent, or they needed, Judaism or whatever, right? He presented himself in a way to that particular group of individuals in which they could experience him, right? And maybe some of the nuances are different, but at their core, these long-standing books that hold these ideas, they're copies of each other. Yeah. And that tells me that, one, it's another data point in so much as God does exist. How could it be possible, right? So these are universal truths shared through this idea of a higher power. So it's another data point to the fact that it is real. And two, even if you don't believe, this is the second point I'll say to them is, like, start like Jordan Peterson started. Act as if. You don't have to believe. Just take these books as the best-selling self-improvement book of all time. You're talking about the Bible. If you just think about it from the standpoint of being a self-improvement book, and act as if, what inevitably happens is you start to feel things that convince you that we aren't alone, that we are connected, that there is a higher power. And then, as you said, hope, faith, perseverance, commitment, passion, love, all these positive things start to roll out of it. And you don't have to believe day one. Just act as if.
For sure. For sure.
This has been a phenomenal conversation. I appreciate the hell out of you and your viewpoint. We're fans. You can come back whenever you want. Your next book, whatever you have going on, come back whenever you want. Especially even if you want to dig deeper into this topic, I would love that. Yeah. For people who've been listening and they're like, I need more of Kelly, where do they go? Where's the best place for them to connect with you?
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it was such a wonderful conversation today, and I feel like it was just meant to be had. So thank you for having me. And the Kelly Roach Show. So I put out 2 episodes a week, and I put my heart into it. It's a commercial-free environment. And I talk spirituality, but I talk business growth strategy, empire building, personal growth, family, freedom, sales, marketing, all the things, team. So just, come on over to the Kelly Roach Show. And if you love today's episode and you want to connect, just, pop in my inbox on one of the platforms and just say, hey, heard you on the show. Love to connect.
Wow. We'll make sure that we have links to Kelly's show as well as some of her other resources. So just scroll down the description or show notes. Appreciate you, Kelly. Wish you nothing but the best. Thank you so much.
You too. Thank you so much.